So I so the potential, everyone knows the potential of investing in Pakistan. Pakistan is the fifth populous country in the world with 220 million people. If you combine Germany, France, and UK, this equals to the population of Pakistan. So Pakistan is huge, and everyone knows that. And with that, we know the tele-density potential, the youth potential. We know why Pakistan is important. But we want to know from a VC perspective, and I would like to start this conversation with Shane, Shane, how your perception about Pakistan, and since you have invested in a Pakistani startup, Airlift. So I would like to know, why is Pakistan important and what makes it so attractive? Over to you, Shane.
Thank you, Syed. Really, it is my sincere pleasure, everyone. My name is Shane Shin. I'm a co-founding partner at ShinFounding Partners, a leading seed stage, early stage VC in the Middle East, North Africa, and Pakistan. I'm not going to repeat what everyone already knows about the true potential of Pakistan, but I would like to focus more on why the timing is right, right? Because everyone can talk about the potential, right? And a lot of the countries, a lot of regions do have potential, still untapped. But why is the Pakistan ripe now? Especially, I believe, actually, that movement has started really about 2 years ago, but it takes about a year and two to really see the fruition. And once it started, it's only gonna go accelerate. First, I've started to notice a lot of the best founders, especially either they're educated in locally from LAMS, but also Europe and the US, they've started to come back with all these successes, their own professional journey. They were able to do very well without being a startup founder, but they actually started to really shift and build more companies, build more startups, and that really becomes a magnet. If we see companies like Airlift to Retail to Bazaar to all these companies do well and create more, for the lack of word, noise and impact, it just actually draws a lot more founders who are ex-Bain, McKinsey, ex-bankers, ex-Google, and etc. to come and launch their own. And once you start to see the momentum, the capital also is there and actually also is following that trend. And I believe this right. And alhamdulillah, Shuruk, we have been lucky enough to capture part of that early momentum and supported by my friend Kalsoom and others who openly invited us to invest. As a GCC, so we're headquartered in Abu Dhabi and we have more offices in the region. And we have been not only by the entrepreneurs, but also strong investors coming alive, right? Eye to Eye, Samar, Fatma Gobi, Zain, LIBC, all those different investors were there to start this early stage of the Pakistan ecosystem, and also now international investors like us come to Pakistan. It makes it so much easier to understand and also be part of that. And I believe that has to come hand in hand. And now that's why the timing is ripe.
Thank you, Shane. Thank you for this opening remark. I'll move to Kalsoom. Shane mentioned the Papastani effect, the momentum they are bringing in, all those wonderful startups that are led by Pakistanis that have global exposure. So your take on that, and since you're involved in the ecosystem for a long time, you know the insights as well, and everyone tracks and everyone gets a look at your tracker, the eye-to-eye tracker, and know where our investment standing is. So your take on that, and is it the Papastani effect or the policy has improved and it is the real the market is right for investments, especially from the VC perspective? Over to you.
Great. Yeah, thanks for that question. And I'll start with the second part of what you asked, Azfar, because Shane, I think, set it up really beautifully. And they were like one of the early international investors coming into the market. So in a lot of ways, Shurooq saw things before a lot of international funds that are now looking at Pakistan are seeing it. So I definitely agree. There is a talent thing that's happening, I think, in terms of just generally pipeline wise, the overall sophistication of founders has increased considerably. Whether or not that means that's necessarily a Papastani thing, and I actually really dislike that term, so I'm not going to use it after I just used it right now. I think we definitely have a lot of people returning back to Pakistan. There's also a lot of amazing talent in Pakistan, right? Whether or not they worked at Kareem in Pakistan, they worked at one of the FMCGs or anything, we're definitely seeing generally the overall average age of founders also increasing. And I think that's something that our data is showing and will come out in our 2021 startup ecosystem study that's coming out in January. But to Shane's point, right, there was a lot of different things that were happening at the same time. So it's not just talent moving home, but also to a certain degree, like Pakistan, obviously, when we look at, everyone always talks about Pakistan being the 5th largest market in the world. But ultimately, when we talk about our addressable market, that was actually a lot smaller than our overall population. And that's significantly increasing now when we think about a few different points, right? So first of all, when we think about digitization in the country, the pandemic, as much as it has been negative, obviously for all the reasons it should be negative, also pushed digitization in Pakistan in ways that we had not been able to see that happen because we did not have government incentivization for that. We didn't really see that push happening from top down. So a lot more people became more comfortable with being online. At the same time, we also saw the policy regulations changing, as you mentioned, Azfar. So we saw, we have a lot more of a progressive regime, especially when it comes to the State Bank of Pakistan and the SECP. So we saw a few game-changing regulations. So the ability for Pakistani startup founders to hold equity abroad in holding companies became a lot more of an easy sell to people that maybe felt uncomfortable putting their money directly into Pakistan, felt more comfortable putting money into an entity in Dubai or Abu Dhabi or Singapore or Delaware. So that was one thing. Obviously, the state bank regulations, to Shane's point about what Shorooq was investing in also with Airlift, and they invested in Retailo, a lot of these e-commerce players. The fintech regulations changing actually unlocked that sector, which was actually really important when we think about, this triangle that tends to happen around e-commerce and logistics and also payments. So we're starting now to see a lot of fintech companies coming up as well. And so to the point about talent, it's definitely, a lot of people with access to networks. And I think there is still a challenge right now when we think about the fact that there's a lot of really amazing founders in Pakistan that may not have, maybe not as polished of a background. So I think there's still a need. And as for you obviously worked on the support side as well. I have as well. I think there's a big need to also think about how we're increasing. And so as Zouhair, obviously, how we increase those networks for people that may not have the immediate access, who may not be as polished, who may not have, are not returning home necessarily. And that's always a positive thing, people coming home and starting companies. But how do we also continue to support everyone so there's a net that exists and not just the ones that are have like the quote unquote right backgrounds, or ones that are maybe more palatable or digestible for international funds when they're looking at Pakistan. So it's not a knock on funds at all. It's also a fact that from a support perspective, what the ecosystem a role the ecosystem can continue to play is playing that support role for all founders.
Thank you for those insights, Kalsoom. Zouhair, you have been a corporate icon for the telecom sector, and this nascent ecosystem where we see ventures and startups now shaping up. Your perspective of Pakistan as an attractive investment when it comes to a large corporation bringing in investors in the telecom sector, and now encouraging VCs and other players to come into the startup space, how different it is, and what do you see in the coming future?
Thank you, Azfar. I would echo most of the thoughts expressed by Shane and Kalsoom as well. One of the things that, I've had the opportunity and the privilege to work in many different parts of the world throughout most of the Middle East, Algeria, Tunisia, Iraq, Egypt, Jordan, etc., and then obviously the UK and the US as well. I may be a little bit biased, but I honestly believe that young Pakistanis are hugely talented, far more talented, I would say, than a lot of the people I've mentioned in the other places. They're willing to work harder, they're willing to work longer, and make it happen. All they've ever lacked is the opportunity to do so, the opportunity to have a platform where they can actually, come in and display their huge talent pool. And I think that's happened many times before in the past. I had a fantastic team when we were running Mobilink in those a long time ago. And that is there today as well. So while we focus on the returning Pakistanis, and I hate that word as well, Kalsoom, so I won't use it. What I'd like to emphasize is that a lot of the founders, and I've been lucky enough to be running the National Incubation Center Pakistan for the last 5 years, and we've come across all types of founders. Yes, some of them are very polished and they're ex-McKinsey or coming from Harvard or whatever else, but that should not undermine the kind of talent pool that we have locally, who may not be very polished, if that's the right word, in terms of the English and the presentation and so on. But I have found those founders who have actually spent time on the ground, whether it's in agri-tech or e-commerce or medicine and anything else you want to name, where they've actually spent time, they've actually gone into the crowd, they worked with the crowd and understood what it takes to drive the startup forward. And I think we should also be very focused on those people and never try and ignore them because they can't speak English, for example. And that's been my experience. Pakistan has always been a potential, okay, as far as I'm concerned. I'm, again, maybe biased. I've come back many times myself to do that. And I came back 6 years ago with the sole purpose of give back. And the give back was to say, how can we enable young Pakistanis with huge talent to take their dreams forward into the next stage? And I think I'm very, very heartened with everything that's happening. You've named some of the numbers, so has Shane. So yeah, we're all aware of the numbers and how they're increasing. I'm looking at $1 billion next year in terms of VC funding in Pakistan, which again is a good thing and a bad thing, because it's good because people everywhere in the world are finally beginning to look at Pakistan as a potential destination. It's also bad because it will create a whole load of startups which may or may not have the validity to succeed in the long term, but because there will be cash, they will be funded. So we need to watch out for some of that. And then I don't think that's a negative. It's a learning process, I think, for everybody, the startups as well as the investors. So as I said, it's just something I flagged. It's nothing to worry about, but it'll happen. I see Pakistan going places in the next 3 to 5 years. We've been a little bit behind in terms of digitization. And as Kalsoom very rightly mentioned, the COVID has been, while obviously a devastating thing for everybody in the world, has been an impetus for rapid digitization and the realization in most Pakistanis that this is something they need to do. And whether it's the guy on the street, and remember again, we've got 185 million mobile connections in the country. So it's like 2.5, 3 times the population of the UK, the Germany, and so on. So we have the connectivity, we have the ability, and people are beginning to catch on to it. Also, I would caution a lot of people sitting outside the country sometimes, and even what I would call my drawing room crowd, who underestimate the ability of the guy on the street to be able to use technology. My experience, they are street savvy, they are aware. Remember, 65% of our population is below the age of 30. So a lot of these people are natural users of technology. They are actually, they're not migrants to it. They're actually natives to it. And that is a huge plus again. And I think the outside world is finally beginning to add all of these things up and say, hey, wow, this is the right time, the right place. And I'm just very happy that, we're all here to take part in this amazing journey.
Thank you, Zouhair. My next question will be from the conversation of Zouhair. And Shane, I would like to ask, what about those founders that might be working in sectors like agri-tech, which is probably not that attractive at the moment for some of the investors, and at the same time they are street smart, they're savvy, they're tech savvy at the same time, they know the market, they know the basic operations of running business in Pakistan. If they approach a VC that is based out of Pakistan, because we all know that most of the investment is coming from outside Pakistan. What's your preference area? What do you see in a founder? And especially when it comes to communication and their language, if they have this barrier, what do you find allies like Kalsoom and others on the ground to help you out with the facilitation, or do you evaluate or vet them on your own?
Yeah. Thank you. So there are several elements to this. First, I hope our friends who work at agriculture tech are not listening to this. Otherwise, they'll be disappointed for us to say that they're less tech, because I'm sure all of us who are in that ecosystem currently, that space is very hot in Pakistan, right? So it is a very hot sector. So, so I have a few comments on this. First, personally and from a Shurooq's perspective, if someone has the language barriers in English, yes, I can always find allies and friends locally, but generally I find it difficult to partner, because this is really more about the relationship, right? And I might be wrong to have this, but at the end, if I cannot communicate, normally that's an issue, right? And I'm not talking about like an accent or broken English, like, and I do also expect, and I can justify this from a business perspective, for a startup or a founder to really be internationally, let's say, scalable and to reach the full potential, I believe language is very important part of that. And it might not be fair, right? It might be not fair for everyone, but unfortunately, I'm here to also share the reality. So that's also important for the discussion. Second, the way I'm going to respond, what we look for the founders, every sector is different. And for example, if I were to look at a fintech on the B2B infrastructure, fintech founder is different from a very operationally heavy, like a retail Airlift. So we have 5 companies in Pakistan today: Airlift, Retailer, Digikata, Postex, and K-Trade. Look, each one of them is very different. And we believe, does the founder, do they have what it takes to win in that market, in that sector, in that vision? And this is how I look at our judgment. I don't say like, oh, because if you're running this Uber for trucks business, you might not have to be very sophisticated or perhaps a very, very presentable, like the way sometimes we would expect naively from a lot of fintech companies, because they don't need to work with the regulars as much, right? So there's a lot of those nuances that you just hone and refine from your years of experience. So the right answer, Syed, is for the sector that you're building your vision and journey with, I want to make sure the founders have a defensible mood and have the perseverance, which is the common trait, but also the will to get to that stage, right? And we as a Shurooq personally prefer very strong operational talents, right? That not everyone is very good at fundraising, and we're okay to back the founders who are not necessarily the best fundraisers, because we can help you fundraise together, right? And so far, we have backed more than 100 founders. We believe that someone who is better on fundraising but less on operations versus better with operations but less on fundraising, we like to go with the latter. But it's just who we are as a style.
Thank you, Shane. Just Kalsoom, since you work with startups as well, and you have the investment readiness program as well, I2I is involved with that. So is it a discussion, or is it you guys work with the startups in terms of the communication as well, and on top of it, their pitch decks and their how to talk to founders and how to reach VCs from outside Pakistan, and how to better present their businesses? Is this a core ingredient of your program?
Yeah. So, and also let me just distinguish. So IDI Ventures is our venture capital fund. It is a sister company to the company Invest to Innovate that I founded now 10 years ago in the market. So we tend to have a lot of symbiotic overlap in terms of, a lot of pipeline coming through on the Invest to Innovate side. Our research team works with both of us. But I personally, right now, I'm no longer the CEO of that company as of last December, but I do advise, and I was just sitting in on a strategy session with that Invest to Innovate team. So that team actually serves a lot of the net that I was talking about before. So that's really where our accelerator program was born 10 years ago. Our research arm was born from that. And so a lot of the programs that we run, Azfar, to your point on that side, is all about the big question that we have. And I think the vision that, Mevish, our new CEO, is really undertaking is, how do we create the most inclusive ecosystem that we can build, right? And so one part of that, it includes women, it includes like people from different backgrounds. Right now, our team is running 3 concurrent programs right now with the World Bank under the Women's Entrepreneurial Finance Initiative, the IFC, as well as Facebook right now on Shimin's business. And so the big question that happens a lot for us, and this came up in our research in our 2019 ecosystem study, was really that there are a lot of companies that are investment worthy, but not investment ready. And so how does the support arm of the company that does the support work, how can it continue to provide that support that's needed? And then from a fund side, right, I'll see great companies and they may just not be, they're worthy, but not ready. So I can send them over to one of the programs on our sister company side to actually get that support. So to your point, and to also what Shane was saying, yeah, there's a lot of, it's not polishing necessarily, but it is somewhat, right? You can see it there in terms of founders that have this amazing vision of what they're building. They just don't know necessarily how to articulate that. And I've definitely seen, and I've been on the other side of this now, from an investor standpoint, I shut down sometimes if I really can't understand where the company is going. And so a part of the training, as you guys know, Zouhair knows from, they've been building with NIC, Azfar, from NIC Karachi as well. It's like, so much of it is really about thinking about the articulation around it. It's about thinking big. A lot of founders in Pakistan, have never been taught to dream big in a lot of ways when we think about our education system. And so really it's getting them to think out of the box, is to look at comparables in other markets, to really learn from other players. And to Shane's point, is a really great example of this. I saw, I looked at Truck It In Early, which is an early Uber for trucking model in the market. And honestly, them now, Sarmad, who's one of the founders now, they were always amazing execution people, right? So for me, I always had conviction on their team. And then now when I'm looking at Sarmad's pitch, it's like a different person. I was actually commenting on that to him because I think he's gotten so used to speaking to outside investors, right? And knowing what they're looking for. And that was never a knock against him before, right? It was the space is really hard. There's all these other reasons, but I just noticed in the act of him fundraising and building a company that he just became so much more articulate in what he was able to answer to. And I think there's so many companies like that. And for us too, to Shane's point, we really look at people that are focused on execution, right? And so you can happen to be good at fundraising as well as execution. I would say the credit book founders who are investors in are definitely like that. But then you can also, what sometimes happens is from a co-founder perspective, and we're investors in Taza, which is in the agri space. And I echo Shane saying that the agri space is very hot right now. The Taza founders, Abrar is definitely the external strategy fundraising person. If you sit down with Mohsen for like 5 seconds, you kind of get you're just kind of overwhelmed and amazed by how much he knows about the operations of what they're building. And it's kind of great when you have partners that are able to do that for you. So you as a founder don't have to do everything. You can actually have, like, from a co-founder situation, someone who's maybe more able to take care of that side of it, because it is, fundraising is a full-time job for a lot of these companies. So definitely thinking about splitting that role, I think, is important. I think good investors will focus on the people that are able to execute, but fundraising is definitely a big part of a lot of these venture plays, right? And to Shane's point, you can, as an investor, you can help them fundraise. But obviously sometimes in these situations, it's a very big role that you have to play constantly. You're not in Pakistan right now, you're not fundraising every year, you're fundraising every 3 to 4 months at this point, that the way that the ecosystem is moving.
Thanks, Kalsoom. So Zouhair Saab, obviously the NIC Islamabad, NIC Pakistan, I would say. The NIC Pakistan is doing an amazing job. It's one of the largest incubation space, and you meet founders every day. And getting what Kalsoom was sharing in her remarks, the training the founders and setting them in with the VCs is one thing, and then what's right for them, the stage at which they should get the investments. From your perspective, when they should approach VCs if they really want, if they're trained enough, one, and at what stage of their business, ideally, you advise them to approach VCs?
I don't think you can actually have a formula for that, to be honest. I mean, yes, you can say, yeah, go get some angel funding, friends and family, then go to a seed and then so on. But what I'm finding at the moment is that a lot of them are going straight to a senior seed fund or a Series A because they're ready. And how are they ready? They're ready because not because they can pitch or they can fundraise. They're ready because their product is ready to go to market. Okay, and so yeah, we can get hung up on a lot of the phrases and the kind of the jingo of what happens in VC speak. But to me, it's more about, are they ready to go to market? And if that's the case and they're ready to now expand, that's the time to go to a venture capital fund, right? Because presumably they've either bootstrapped, they've done some angel funding, they've come to a stage where they're now ready. And to me, that's how I look at this. And sometimes it's just confusing to label it as a seed or a pre-seed or a Series A, etc. It's convenient, but it can be confusing at times.
So, Shane, my next question would be to you. For a company that is based in Middle East, what do you guys prefer syndicated rounds, or is it good to be a lead investor and then invest in this? So what we are witnessing in Pakistan is more of a syndicated round where there's similar sort of checks from VCs. So is it knowing the market better, or it will change with time where investment will be done by a lead investor and other parties joining in? So how do you perceive it?
Mm-hmm. So I have 3 points on this. First, just to speak from a Shorooq's perspective, we actually always prefer to lead, while we also have others who we particularly love to collaborate with. Some could be just relationship. Some could be, I know that they have a deep expertise on certain sectors, right? Some might just have a relationship with a lot of international investors. So like it really depends on the opportunity. If I'm the leading, I take that into consideration. So like the reason, Syed, we actually see a lot of syndicates. If you say syndicates, doesn't mean is no lead. Normally there is a lead, but still there is a syndicate, right? Which one of the big reasons I believe is happening is Pakistan, in my humble view, founders and the startup market is growing faster than the VC or the funding market. Generally, this is the case for emerging market because VCs also need to fundraise from their LPs, and that also grows less faster than the VCs. So this is a cyclical, let's say, delay. Now, the issue is if the founder tells VCs, look, I want to raise $10 million seed round. No VCs in Pakistan and also even in the region can tell you, oh, I'm going to put $7 million, $8 million seed round, and then I bring an additional $2 million. Right? That's why we see a lot of syndicates. I don't think it's a bad thing at all. It's just the way the market is evolving. And that also means, especially this year, as I2I, the report indicates, we're seeing an explosive growth in Pakistan startup funding market, like literally 10 times faster probably on how the VC market fund size grew. And that we need to address it. Some part of that has been addressed by international investors coming in. Some part of it will be addressed by like a local VCs and regional international VCs like us, right? But we need to address that fast. In this way, we will see different VCs who have a color, and I use the word like every VC is different, although they might look all similar. And we want to have a VCs who have a color to stay consistent on their color, and actually back the founders who might not be liked by ABC VC, but better be liked by XYZ VCs. Right? So I think we need to get there. We're gonna get there probably in a year or hopefully, right? I believe that's happening very soon.
Thank you. So Kalsoom, this coalition of VCs. Your take on this?
Yeah, I mean, I was laughing because I 100% this resonates, right? It's like the space started, we're in the middle of, we're been able to make we've invested in 8 companies, but we're literally, as Shane mentioned, we're raising our funds, right? So we're raising our funds while we're investing, and the market started moving extremely fast in the last 9 months. And so I think what was, that speaks to the reason why, in a lot of ways, like, inshallah, like all of us will be in a position to lead more rounds. But I also see value in the collaborative element of us co-investing with people, right? And I think a lot of international VCs see that as well, right? I've been in a lot of deals recently, and even every day at this point, I'm getting messages from VCs out in New York or Silicon Valley that are looking at Pakistan and need like a local check on things and actually get a sense of things. Because as we know, who operate on the ground, and it's the same, for Shani's operating in the Middle East, these are very high friction markets, right? So what may work in Indonesia, even though it's a fair comparable, or India, it works differently in Pakistan. And so I think it's important for you to have a local, but I think amongst even locals, right? I've invested a lot with Zain Capital, right? And both vessels are really good friends of ours. We bring different value to the table. So as 2 locals, like people, can get really competitive in the market, but I've seen real value in that. I speak to Ali a lot at Fatima Gobi. We've been in a deal with Sarmaya Car. So I do see that it's less about leading and more about like, do you have the right recipe of investors at the table that can really bring value to you, right? And so I definitely see that we're going to have, as most of these funds close, some of them are raising now, they're thinking about their second funds. We're definitely going to see more locals leading, but I think with international funds, for the most part, Shorooq is obviously setting up in Pakistan and like has really kind of indicated that. But for outside of MENA, most international funds that are like Europe or Pakistan based, very few of them actually have a Pakistan mandate, right? Pakistan is very opportunistic for 100% of them. And they have like $70 million funds. To Shane's point, like if someone's raising a $7 million round and you are a $70 million fund, you can write an easy check for someone, right? And lead that round considerably. For most of us in Pakistan, our average, I would say the median size of our funds is maybe between, maybe 18 to 20 million is the median size, right? So you're dealing with much smaller funds, but also as the market has shifted, one thing that I would say is that all of us have shifted as well, right? Our check sizes are shifting. We're shifting our strategies considerably. I've learned how to move so much faster as an investor to make decisions a lot more quickly because these deals are just moving so fast. And so in a lot of ways, that international attention on Pakistan has made us, and I hope, better investors, right? We've become much more professionalized, much more like just the ability to move, the ability to kind of figure out our voice within that. I think that's been a really important thing that's happened.
Thanks. So, Zouhair, I think so the speed of signing checks will increase as Kalsoom indicated. And what about the ticket size? I think so where we still want VCs or investors to have that 100,000 to 200,000 space covered as well. Your take on that, the early part of it, and overall VCs having this synergy of funding startups.
Yeah, look, I mean, I just go back to a little previous question, which is about whether leading or syndicating. I think this is going to be a very collaborative space. That's how I expect it to be, because we're all just starting, as are the startups. And I think at this stage, it's the better value is collaboration with everybody around you. And yes, similar-minded investors coming in to invest in a particular startup. So that I think is my focus as well. Ticket sizes will grow. I think the speed of signing checks, to me, sometimes you get a little bit apprehensive about that, because it's happening because there are a lot of startups out there. They're coming up in the marketplace, and sometimes I'm sorry to say this, but VCs are hurrying to get on the table before the other guy does, and in that process, I fear that there will be not enough due diligence conducted, which will result sometimes in disappointment in the future. So I would caution on that, and I don't think that is a quality in a VC to write a check. And I've heard people say, I've written a check in 3 days and 1 week, and that scares me, because that is not good for the ecosystem in the long run. We need to be able to make the right decisions about the right startups and then put the funding in. Having said that, I think the ticket sizes will grow. They will become better. But it doesn't mean that everybody is going to have a $70-80 million fund. There will still be people who will be operating at the lower end. And I think they will still be catering for the, as you said, the $100 to $200, $250,000 type investments, although there may be less of them as time goes by. So I think that's my take on that one. I think also coming back to the other question about knowledge on the ground, I think it's very essential to be able to have that knowledge of the realities on the ground. I mean, the team we put together, each one of us has operational knowledge of Pakistan, of setting up, growing, scaling companies. And I think that's very important because the dynamics of each country, and I'm not saying Pakistan is more difficult than any other, but it's different from, let's say, a Malaysia or in Indonesia, a Bangladesh, an Egypt, whatever. There may be very good similarities, but there will be differences as well. And I think that's why it's very important to work with people on the ground who have that deep knowledge and can bring it to the table.
So Syed, may I comment on this speed? Because I think it's really, really important. I think every VC, every investor agrees, but I don't think we're speaking out enough on this point on the speed. So just to underestimate, I think we're at a crazy speed. Not only in Pakistan, across frankly the whole world.
Yeah,
right?
MENA too.
Yeah, MENA for sure. And sometimes the way I see is, founders the best ration is this happens in the developed markets, right? And then I talk to my friends in developed markets. The biggest difference here is, look, let's say US, the VC market has been around for more than 4 decades. Regulation is very stable. A lot of things are very well known, easier to DD. If you give me a full week of a data room that I can just spend time and go through, I can give you the answer in perhaps 2 to 3 days. But our region is very different. A lot of things are literally nothing. There is no regulation. It's a gray area. Or we still need to talk to many other folks to understand how the customers react to it. So I feel sometimes we're just taking not the full picture. We're only taking some pictures that is relevant and useful for my own argument, and then try to really create a FOMO and the effect. And I can tell you, Shurooq, we are definitely also, we have adapted to this and we are writing checks very, very fast. And I believe we are doing that to also lead and survive. However, I don't think that's healthy, right? And we need to be very clear that, look, if you're looking for the investors who can write you the fastest check, although that could be a very good strategy, and I believe also, as Kalsoom did point to it, that is part of becoming a better investor also, and I take that also as a big consideration. But really, there's some more to that, right? As long as what you don't want is the investors wasting time of the founders, and I believe the best founders can see through that. And if you have that a relationship with the investor, I'm sure all of us will do well. But I just wanted to make it clear because I don't think as a VC, because we're I know Kalsoom, although it's my first time to meet with Zouhair, I've heard about NIC. So I know many people feel this way, but we just don't speak out loud enough, right?
So Kalsoom, Shane briefly mentioned about the regulatory space and the challenges that are associated with the regulatory space. Do we have real problems of at the regulator level, or do you think that now the regulators are at a better direction where you have SECP coming up with good regulations, and then State Bank is also very active? Do we really need more clarity in terms of policy, or I think so it's good time for other players to jump in? So your take on the overall regulatory and policy side of this space.
Sure, and I'm sure Zouhair can comment on this as well, like your history in the space. I mean, I think altogether, yes, it's great that we've had some changes. I think that those changes have been really important. There is a lot more to do. And I think it's great that the state bank specifically and the SECP they've been led by progressive people, right? And I think that's great. But how do we create more institutional knowledge that can exist if tomorrow, Dr. Azfar is no longer heading state bank, right? How can we ensure that things won't go backwards? How do we ensure that we continue to move forward? And it's also about creating institutional knowledge below the people that are leading things and ensuring that people in those bodies are actually on board and understand this space. One major player that has been an elephant in the room, as in they have not been in the room at all, has been FBR. So when we think about the taxation regime in Pakistan, it continues to be and it's not, FBR is ultimately undertaking like a policy, right? So at the end of the day, like our taxation regime in Pakistan is very onerous towards small businesses, medium businesses in Pakistan. And when we think about like how that has been a player and why so many people don't even want to be part of the formal economy, right? We don't want to be part of the official tax net. So when we think about all these B2B companies that have been pushing people online, that has happened in spite of the taxation regime, right? Which is amazing to me that we've seen that amount of growth that's happened. And so when we think about all the things that needs to happen, it just continues. Like, there's Misbah, my partner, who's been on the working groups for the state bank for a lot of the changes that we've seen. And we know that there's so much left on the agenda. Those were just things that have happened, which are super game-changing regulations. So don't get me wrong. And all the credit goes to people that have been working at those bodies. But I think there's so much more that needs to change. When we think about even the payment space, right? And what Rust, as an example, aims to do, it has huge game-changing implications of what it will aim to do, but it has not happened yet, right? So when we think about the need for interoperability in the payment space, when we think about all the things that we need to think about in terms of payments that needs to get unlocked, we talk about a lot that people are on their phones, which is great, except what are they using their phones for, right? A lot of people are on TikTok on their phones, regardless of what SEC, what backgrounds they are, but are they all really using for payments in a seamless way, the way that we're seeing it in Africa, right? People use like literally their phones for everything. And that hasn't it's starting to happen. And obviously, so much of the work of Jazz and what Telenor has done, like we're seeing a lot of that happen, but it's still not interoperable. Things are still a little clunky in user experience. When we're thinking about the fact that there's so much else to unlock, the fact that the Indian government has banned crypto and there's a huge amount of use cases for Pakistan for blockchain and crypto, there's a huge amount of opportunity to be more progressive and to be really open about these things. But oftentimes it's really important to unlock and unpack the thinking behind in these government body ways of why things haven't changed, right? So like if people are afraid from an FATF perspective, if us being on the gray list is a thinking about why money going abroad is something really hard for people to understand how they can change that. We need to understand that thinking in order to advocate for change and also to be able to present solutions in ways that government can find digestible and palatable as well. Because right now, at least in those two bodies, we have people at those regimes that are really open to listening. But then how do we bring in players like FBR into the room, into those spaces, so that we can continue to bring like more of a holistic change to policy?
Thanks, Kalsoom. So, Zouhair, when she was mentioning FBR, sitting in Karachi and in the province of Sindh, I was thinking about SRB as well, and sales tax is applicable to, and it's another ball game altogether. So, we look at the side of policy interventions, and Kalsoom mentioned about RAS. We have, in terms of investment, the Roshan digital accounts has been a success for the government. At like for 13-14 months, it has attracted over $2.7 billion into Pakistan. So can there be some vehicles for investment in terms of this space? And can there be some products and can be some creative things at the government end where the taxes or the taxation regime or the FBR side, the SBP side, the SECP side, and other regulators come in, join hands, and promote and facilitate investors?
I think you've asked the $1 million question. I could spend all evening trying to go through everything that is still needs to be fixed. At the NIC Pakistan for the last couple of years, we hold something called the Investor Roundtable, where we bring in people like Kalsoom as well and others on the investment side. We bring in the startups, we bring in the representatives of the State Bank of Pakistan, the FBR, the SECP, and so on. And I would totally agree with Kalsoom that the missing player in the party has always been FBR for whatever reasons, and that needs to change. But there's so much else that needs to change. We are at a golden moment sitting in Pakistan right now in terms of the potential, as we continue to speak about, in terms of the venture capital investment that can actually change the entire direction of Pakistan today. Some of the things, I've just spent 8 or 9 days in Silicon Valley, and you know, the principal couple of questions that people ask is, if I put my money into Pakistan, can I repatriate it when my 10 rupees becomes 100 rupees? How do I get it out of Pakistan? A. B, we talk about, you know, the fact that if you know, the rupee dollar depreciation, for example, everybody worries about that. Although I find that to be the least of the problems. If you look at the last 37 years of Pakistan's history, rupee against dollar has depreciated at about 8 to 10% per annum, come what may, except for that blip of 2013 to 2018, where it was artificially held at a particular rupee dollar parity. But if you then get rid of that little blip and you calculate again, it's still 8 to 10% per annum, even in that period of time. So we need to get that story out to people. We need to make people understand more that these are the risks involved, but they're factored into the returns that the VCs are calculating and modeling. If you look at some of the other issues, for example, FBR, one of the most wonderful things they could do, and it doesn't need to be reinventing the wheel. In the UK, for example, they have what is called the SEIS scheme. That's a small enterprise investment scheme where if an investor puts money into a startup and within the 3-year period that startup fails, the investor is entitled to 50% rebate on their investment by the tax authorities, by the HMRC, and so on. So there's different levels of how that works. Those things that would be an enormous boon to incorporate into our tax regime, for example, so that people who are investing can take the benefit of it and be incentivized to invest in the country. And I totally agree with the issue about the dollar repatriation, which is a big issue for everybody. And I know, you know, Rast and Roshan Digital have made moves in that direction, but I think there's so much more that needs to be done here to make that go further. So I think one of the things that we should be talking about, at least 3 of us are on the table, and I'm sure the others who are listening, is that we need to combine our efforts in this regard to constantly go back to the relevant authorities to make sure that we can lobby and make them understand that this is all for the good of Pakistan in the end, and for Pakistani founders and Pakistani startups in the long run. So I will certainly continue to go down that path. I spent most of this morning meeting people in the relevant departments with exactly these issues and addressing them, and very happy to combine our efforts as we go forward, because I think, as I said earlier, this is a collaborative effort. We're all trying to do the same thing, and if we go at it together, I'm sure we can have a bigger impact.
I think we have last 10 minutes, and probably last question to all of you would be, we have discussed the potential of Pakistan. We have discussed a few of the challenges. We have discussed some policy intervention that can be done. How will be this space like in 2022? And what will be the favorite areas, or you can see the, say, key verticals where there will be some investment or movement coming in? So starting from Shane.
Well, I wish I know the answer for certainty. Then I would be putting all my fun and the personal wealth into that. But generally, I believe next year is going to be a great year for what I call B2B infrastructure fintech space. And I saw the similar trend in the Middle East. So back in 2017-18, we had an uprising of a lot of this B2C focused fintechs, and we still see a lot of them in number. But really, starting in 2020, 2021, we actually started to see a lot more, let's say, infrastructure level fintech companies, and who actually support not only the fintech, this B2B FMCG space. It can be health tech space. That's why another reason why fintech in the Middle East is absolutely booming. And we have back
Crucial.
like open banking, digital processor side, and etc. And it takes more years for these B2B companies to thrive because regulation is more difficult and it's more intense. It takes more time to develop. Also, technology layers are more developed, and also investors also need to be more developed because it's a lot more patient. We have to be a lot more patient. You don't see your B2C traffic growing every month. So I believe that 2022 and forward, Pakistan is ripe for something like that because now the last 2 years in Pakistan, we have been seeing huge influx of B2C related fintechs, and I believe it's ripe for that. But big assumption here is that regulatory landscape, as we talked about, because they need to be working a lot with this fintechs, and if that goes well, we're gonna absolutely crush it. All right.
So the recent investment was with Abhi by the I2I Ventures. You also see fintech as the great potential in the year 2020.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, so Abhi, we followed on with them in their next round that was just announced, but we actually invested in their pre-seed round when they were literally an idea on paper. So feel proud about that one. And we've actually invested in 3 fintech deals already. So Creditbook, Abhi, and Aran. And actually what's interesting, so my partner, Misbah, who, Azfar, is a fintech operator as her background, right? Prior to this, it actually makes her the resident skeptic in the room, which is a really good thing, because I think as much as everyone is like, we just launched a neobank, like she is the first one to kind of tell you why it won't work or what's the barriers to everything. So in some ways, it's great that we've done, out of our 8 companies, 3 are fintechs. And I definitely see a lot more coming up in the pipeline. We still haven't done a deal in InsurTech. There's stuff in payments. Like there's a lot of verticals within fintech. But to Shane's point, if we look at the data itself, and this is data that we've released from Eye to Eye, this year, obviously companies in Pakistan have raised a little over, at this point, almost 300 million, a little over 300 million at this point. The largest amount that's been raised is by the e-commerce sector, but the most amount of deals that have happened in fintech, right? So, and that's because of the policy changes that I was mentioning earlier have kind of unlocked the space. If you asked me in 2019, I would have said the fintech space is not something that I was super bullish on, just because of a lot of the barriers that existed. It was expensive to build a fintech in Pakistan because of those barriers. And now that space has been unlocked, we're just seeing kind of more and more players. As you're seeing e-commerce come up and logistics come up, and every single company, this is to Angela Strange's point from Anderson, like A16Z, is that everyone eventually has to become a fintech at some point, right? Fintech really kind of services all of these spaces. So I think there's a huge amount of opportunity. The fact that the quantum of deals is so high in fintech this year means that we're going to see a huge amount of those companies, some that will continue to survive, new companies that will enter, will continue to raise a lot more money. And I think we need to have, I know that, Shorooq does venture debt. We need to have a little bit more sophistication in the types of capital that we also provide this space, right? We need to have a lot more debt facilities. We need to be able to service these fintech players a lot better as they grow. And I think that's also going to continue to happen. I think we're going to see a little bit, to be honest, I've always been a little bit more cautious about the space, but I think to Zouhair's point earlier about the currency devaluation, I think we might see a little bit of a course correction that starts to happen. To Shane's point earlier about how things are growing too fast, and that might not be always a positive thing. I've seen valuations that I literally would have been looked at in shock and horror like 2 years ago, and now it's just kind of become, this is the norm now. And I think we're going to see a little bit of correction happen, I hope, in some ways, because I think it's kind of gotten too inflated, too large, too fast. And so I think as people start to get a little bit more settled in the market, I think if the devaluation is happening, which it will likely happen, it is happening right now, I think we're going to start to see just a little bit of correction happen. It won't mean that the ecosystem is slowing down. It just means that it's kind of more grounded in reality, which I think is a good thing. So I think altogether 2022, I feel positive about it. I think that's important for the local VC space. And Zouhair, obviously with what you guys are building as well, it's important to have a strong local VC space that can exist regardless if international VCs are putting in money into Pakistan or not, right? So I think we need to have that continue to grow to kind of match that, and to have VCs that provide real value, right? I think one thing I've learned as a VC, and I met Shane really early in my journey when I was starting the fund. So I asked you questions early on that now I've learned from doing, but when when you're a local VC or any VC, you often talk about being founder friendly, and that doesn't really mean much, right? It's like everyone's supposed to be founder friendly, but you learn what it means that 99% of the work happens after you do the deal. You learn what it means to be a good investor once you start investing, right? And what it really means to bring value and to really figure out your voice within the VC ecosystem. And I think that's something that we've really learned as well at Eye Ventures. Like, we may not be the biggest check right now until we hopefully inshallah close the fund, but ultimately what I think is important is that we know what it means to provide value post investment, and that's actually been our best way of getting into other deals right now. And I think we're going to see that happen also in the market as well, is that all the founders speak to each other, right? Which I think is a really good thing. And so all the bad VCs, international, local, regional, will get weeded out by that process. And I think that's also going to happen. It's happening already right now. It'll continue to happen as the ecosystem grows.
Great, thank you, Kalsoom. Zouhair, your take on it, and year 2022, what would be the like for VC landscape and for investors in Pakistan?
I think, as I said earlier, I'm looking at $800 million to $1 billion coming into Pakistan here in 2022 in terms of VC funding. Maybe I'm bullish, but that's my belief. I agree that fintech will be a place where a lot of attention will be paid. I think it does provide the kind of the rails for any business to flourish, and I think that's going to be very important to the ecosystem as a whole. But I wouldn't discount, and we've seen this year, it's been a kind of a wave this year. You've had fintech, you've had logistics, you've had e-health, and kind of it's been a wave, right? And I think next year, I firmly believe that we shouldn't ignore players in agri-tech and education and health, because I think I see a pipeline there, it's happening. And I think all of those will flourish. E-commerce, already mentioned a couple of times, I think it's going to be another very big area because there's so much to do. I mean, it's 225 million people, guys. So even if there's 5 or 6 e-commerce companies out there, it's going to be pretty okay for everyone to have a fair share of the market. And the way Pakistan is structured, geographically also, you could dominate the entire Punjab without actually touching Karachi, which on its own could be a huge market, and so on. So I think while fintech and e-commerce will probably be foremost out there, but I wouldn't discount some of the others that I've mentioned. I think they will equally be taking their place, as they should, because that's how the entire digitization process of Pakistan will progress, in my opinion.
Thank you, Zouhair. Thank you, Zouhair. Thank you, Kalsoom, and thank you, Shane, for your time. That's it for today's session. Over to you, Syed.
Thank you very much, Azfar. Welcome back, viewers. I would like to thank all our panelists, guests, viewers, audience for joining us today. On day 5, which is tomorrow, we have an exciting shows coming up. So stay tuned, and we'll see you all tomorrow. Once again, thank you all for being with us at CXO Global Forum. Stay connected.